Welcome to the Wyndham Art Prize 2020 Artist in Conversation. Today we're going to be speaking to Carolyn Warren-Langford, Megan Bonnici and Jonathan Mendez-Baute. I acknowledge that the land that we're filming on and where the Wyndham Art Prize is being exhibited is the land of the Kulin Nation, where the city of Wyndham is being built. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal people.
My name's Megan Bonnici. The work that I have included in this Wyndham Art Prize 2020 is called Space Dunes. I hope you like it.
So thank you so much for coming in. It's actually a wet, rainy day out there, so I really appreciate your time coming in and giving us some insight into your work, because all of these artists are local artists, so it's really great to hear from our local artists about their work in the Wyndham Art Prize.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's very exciting to be selected to be a part of such a wonderful show. I've tried a few times and I'm very excited. And to see how everyone's work looks, I'm really looking forward to it.
So you did some work, you were in our recent show towards the end of last year called New, and you did some new work. It was a show that was curated by myself and Clive Gono, co-curated by Clive Gono. We came and looked at your work, and you have a huge variety of work. You're one of those artists who does a bit of everything. And I think, also, because I know that one of the things you also do, which takes up a lot of your time, is being a teacher, an art teacher. And I think you said when we came to your studio that a lot of the things you do are as a result of trialling things and testing things out to teach. And so you're really diverse in your practice. But for the new exhibition, you showed us some of your photography work, which is what you've now extended on, a new work that we hadn't seen that you've submitted to the Wyndham Art Prize. So do you want to talk a little bit about that body of work in general and maybe the one that you put into the prize?
Yeah, sure, thanks. The abstract photography has been an interest for, I think I was trying to figure it out this morning, probably about 18 years. And it's a lovely, refreshing change from knitting, because I'm a knitwear designer.
As you can see.
Yeah, and knitting I do mostly hand knits, and they can take, weeks, months, years to complete. So the photography is wonderful because it's quick, and I don't tend to edit them a lot, just some minor tweaks in contrast or cropping or something. But I really enjoy the idea of capturing movement in a still image, and a lot of the abstract artwork, abstract photography that I do is about lights and movement, and it's really just about the aesthetics of the lines, the shapes, the colours, and it doesn't have to look like anything. And I really like that side of it. The viewer can decide what it's about for themselves. They can just enjoy perhaps getting lost in the possible story of what they might be seeing. And as much as I adore beautiful photography of exotic places and travel photography, these photos could be almost anywhere.
That's great. So you sort of, I think what you're talking about too is using photography as an art form as opposed to a representational means. And these days it's sort of interesting because pretty much everybody takes photographs these days. Everybody's got a mobile phone, everybody takes photos, and everybody could call themselves a photographer, really, and a lot of the times they do. And I think that it's interesting to hear that you've been working on this series of work for 18 years. That's actually a real commitment to a particular, and I know this is just one arm of your work, it's not all of your work, but it's really interesting that you've been consistent and considered about that approach to photography, which is sort of taking it more into a realm that relates differently to what people can take on their phone of their holiday snaps or whatever. Even though they're beautiful, that's a very different thing to making photographs as an art form. So do you know what first took you to doing those abstract works? Was it accidental? Because often they're really accidental, those works. Not yours, but, you know, I know when you do that.
To be honest, like you've said, it's more using the photography as an art form. Even to this day, I find that I can't really consider myself a photographer because all the technical details about lighting, and I've never really delved a lot into that, and my creative mind doesn't cope too well with, you know, technical details. And so
I can relate to that.
f-stops and things like that. So, and my textile design background means that I've always been interested in taking close-ups. So even before I had digital camera, when I'd go places, I'd be photographing the lichen on the rocks or the something abstract to do with the shapes I'd see in nature. And so I have always had that interest in textures and shapes, patterns. When we purchased a digital camera, that was when I started playing around with it, having the immediacy of being able to see how it looked. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's very different, isn't it, to taking a photograph, having to get the film developed, then getting a print, and then the expense of that. So I can see now that when you talk about textures, that there is a real relationship between the visual of your abstract photographs, which is sort of really interesting because it's a very flat surface, and you wouldn't think of it as textured, except the imagery is very textured. And I can see a relationship between that and between your textile design background. Can you tell me a little bit about what your training was as a textile designer?
I was just going to mention something I was thinking about with the textures in that particular one. Can I mention that first?
Sure.
The photograph was taken at the National Gallery Triennial Exhibition.
Oh, right.
And it was one of Guape's among the fashion design exhibition, and there was a lot of sequins. So what you see, it's not fabric itself, it's the little spots of light and the flow of the photograph. I think one of the reasons I chose it was because of the layering and because of the idea of it not looking like a flat surface.
And it came actually from, was it the light on the sequence and then you moved? Is that how you created it?
And I love the fact that it really doesn't reference the photograph, what I was taking the photograph of. The subject doesn't come into the photograph at all. It's just purely an abstract light depiction from the tiny little bits of light. So the other question was relating to my training, is that right?
Yeah.
So
where did you begin as an artist?
Began as an artist more than 45 years ago. I've been knitting since I was about 7, so I think that's around 45 years or so, and drawing since before that. But my formal training was at RMIT from 96 till 98, and that was, my degree was in textile design. But I also had some terrific drawing teachers, so my passion for drawing also was heightened at that time. And then I worked in industry for a few years from 90 till 93 for Sportscraft Consolidated, and then I had family and enjoyed that immensely, doing my own work at home while bringing up the children. And then I decided to go back to train to become a teacher at about, 2007, and I did a double major in visual arts at University of Melbourne. And luckily, I managed to get that the last year that they offered a 1-year grad dip.
Oh, right.
So I didn't have to do 2 years of training, and then was fortunate enough to pick up full-time work after that.
Great. And you teach locally, don't you?
I do, yes, at MacKillop College.
And MacKillop College,
Yes.
I know. They're very lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. And so, and I'm just interested too, because this is like a drawing in knitting. It's really interesting. I mean, it's not a drawing of something, but it
is a drawing.
It is.
Yeah. From a distance, you can see it probably better. But actually has I've included the date and LH, which stands for left hand.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of my drawing left-handed just because I enjoyed the freedom of the gestural lines. So it's a picture of one of the other art students in one of our drawing classes. Yeah. And the jumper is new, but it's all made from old swatches.
Bits and pieces.
So they've all got, it's very nostalgic for me.
It's beautiful.
So this one's
It's really amazing.
97.
And so, when you see Megan's work in the Wyndham Art Prize, you can really hopefully you'll reflect back on hearing Megan talk about her work, because you'll really understand what I mean about the texture between her work, in her visual work and her practical physical work, and that those things are interrelated. And I love the idea that actually that very sort of abstract and it's not tied to any meaning, that photograph, but that it actually comes from a work of textile art. That's fantastic. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Thank you so much. It was really great talking to you and hearing more about your work, and look forward to watching what you do in the future.
Thank you. My pleasure, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be encouraged in this way.
Yeah, it's great.
And I wish all the best to all the other artists involved as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Mendez. I'm one of the artists at the Wyndham Art Prize 2020. My sculpture is Thoughts, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for having me.
Jonathan, thanks so much for coming in on this cold, rainy day to talk to us about your work in the Wyndham Art Prize. So to begin with, I'd just love to hear you talk a little bit about the work. We've seen your work, and in fact, I was talking the other day about your work that we had in the Reveal exhibition, and we have 2 of your works in our collection. But I'd really love to hear you talk about the particular work that you've submitted in this year's Wyndham Art Prize, because it's actually 2 pieces that you've placed together, isn't it?
That's correct. Well, thank you very much for having me here, and I feel very lucky to be part of this award. As you are familiar with my work, I use clay as my medium of expression. And the reason for that is it's a material that will remember my actions, my interaction with it. So in this particular piece called Thoughts, it's all about the interaction between humans and nature, and how they intermingle, and how they affect each other.
Which is a lot of what your work is about, isn't it? Like, it's sort of the theme that runs through your work pretty much.
It's something that, because you can play with form so much. And every time I do a sculpture, I'm always thinking about I have to be able to bring that interaction, to make the viewer feel that interaction and think about it. I have to keep in mind that the 2 subjects that I pick, normally I play with 2 subjects, they have physical elements and the non-physical elements. And physical elements would be like gravity, texture, folds, weight. And then the non-physical elements is the expressions and
postures and things like that, yeah.
Yeah, personalities,
yeah.
The soul, and feelings. And so in this particular piece, I have the male with the powerful figure, and then I have the vulnerable figure, which is the marine iguana. But I try to compose them in a way that they are both, that power bar is level. So I place the marine iguana on top of the head of the male, just like the marine iguana will stand on the rocks, the seashore, and take possession of it. And at the same time, I try to acknowledge a little bit of a tension, just simple element of tension with the touch, and kind of trying to tell this person, what are we doing? What are you doing? And try to turn the head, look that way. It's just fascinating to have, to be able to, when you see what's happening today and you see what we do to nature and we see the changes in nature after we actually stop being so careless, not because we want, sometimes because we have to. And you see this massive change, recovery.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it, to see what's happened with the skies clearing and the canals in Venice becoming blue, and it's extraordinary how quickly nature can recover. Sort of the only thing hopeful about this, but yes.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to capture in my work. I remember there's another piece I've worked in the past, which is my first piece in Australia, which you guys have as part of the collection.
The still.
Yep.
Yes.
And I remember working in that piece, and they were talking about the white rhinoceros, which is one of my characters, one of the powerful characters in there. But at the same time, it's quite vulnerable. I placed in a position that it was quite vulnerable. But I remember hearing about it was going to be extinct. And here you are, working on an idea, and at the same time, this idea is manifesting in reality. And it really encouraged me to keep talking about it. I really think that all I hope for, actually, is that when people look at my work, that you think about it for a second and try to understand that, we can live in harmony, and we can actually, it can be beautiful, part of a beautiful photograph, beautiful picture.
That's really great. It's interesting because I think your work has many layers to it, because I see so many different, that's what I think is very powerful about it, is that there's lots of different interpretations you can bring to the work, because the humans in your work are also interesting in that they're not the idealised form of a human, which I think is really powerful as well. But one of the things I really wanted to ask you about, because I know that you're a self-taught artist, and yet many people look at your work, they would be really amazed that you've managed to teach yourself such a high level of skill, because your work is very, very realistic. And also the other thing that I really wanted people to understand is the environment you work in, and you must be very neat, I think, because the space that you work in is so small, and yet you create these highly sophisticated images that really require really, really fine looking and seeing, and concentration. And yet you work in your kitchen, which is amazing. I love that.
Well, it's interesting, and because yes, I am a self-taught artist. I'm hoping that, because of the way this video is going to be online, I just wanted to thank my best friend mother in Venezuela, Luisa Eugenia, and she told me, she's a potter.
Oh, yes.
And she taught me everything I know, literally in a 10-minute conversation.
Wow.
So I use the same technique that I learned during high school. I use it now. She fired my first pieces.
Wow.
And it was really encouraging to see that you could approach material, completely unknown material, knowing that, okay, you just have to do this, and then put them into 1,000 degrees, and the material come out, and it will be all good, everything works. everything is going as planned. Then, of course, you know, I have a background in graphic design, and I also have a background in, I'm a qualified chef. But my artistic life, I've always been kind of sifting through the cracks of life. You know, I would have to find an excuse to do it. And then I can stop, you know, and then when I finish, then I get busy again with life, and then I have to find another excuse to put myself in there, and then you can't stop. And, you know, that's how. So I ended putting my working stand literally we live in a small place, but I have it in a way that I can do work. I can turn around and wash the dishes if I need to.
That's fantastic.
And then continue working. And
it really takes away people's excuse for, oh, I can't make art, I don't have the right studio, or I don't have the time. I think that's really a great lesson from you.
Well, and it's interesting because if I can talk a little bit about my creative process, there's two pathways I take. One is the learning pathway, and then the other one would be the improvisation pathway. So, and I learned to manage them accordingly. So if I want to, for example, every time I do a sculpture, when I did thoughts, I have never drawn on a marine iguana. I never sculpted a marine iguana. So I have to do a little bit of a learning path and start doing sketches and getting familiar with the forms and the spaces and building that muscle memory. And then once I lock that, I can start working, you know, I go straight into the development of the subject, but thinking on anatomy, not so much about thinking the composition. And to break that and start being a little bit more free into the creative process, I jump into a improvised element where I start building the human head, which is a subject that I'm familiar with. And I can do that watching TV. I can do that because I'm already familiar with those spaces.
It's almost as though you work from the inside out. So you understand the structure of something, then you can create it in many different forms. Like you don't have to look at an iguana in that particular position in order to make it in that particular position. You understand how the iguana works, then you can create it in whatever position you want it to be in. That seems like how you work to me.
Exactly. It's kind of like to be able to break the rules, you gotta know the rules. And art for me is you gain so much knowledge, so much wisdom. Every time you draw a microphone, you draw a camera, you gain so much insight into this. And I really want people to appreciate that. You know, even though it's not anatomically correct, it's not because I can't do it. It's because of the time frames and how much, pretty much the time frame and do you have the right space to really take it into taking all these measurements and all that. But because I got a busy life, I kind of learned to understand, okay, this is enough for me to communicate the story, make the people feel that it's real, and hopefully, you know, they'll get the message and change their life or change their thinking.
That's great. I love the commitment to social change in your work. I think that's really interesting. So can you say a little bit about what it's like being an artist in this time, like with all of these things going on? Like it's a very, suddenly we're, you know, in a global context. You know, sometimes I wake up and I go, oh my goodness, this thing that I couldn't even imagine was going to happen is happening all over the world. And so what is it like for you at the moment being an artist?
I think, like I mentioned before, I feel very lucky that I was in a state of mind where I can actually I can actually sit down and deal with isolation. But I feel like the people that are out there that don't have ways to expressing themselves, may find that you run out of options. And being an artist in this time, I think, has been a benefit for me because it helped me go through. It helped me show my family and my friends, hey, you gotta learn to express yourself. You gotta be able to have tools of, all this anxiety, all this pressure that you feel, all this, I don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. You gotta channel that energy, and at the same time use that to communicate something positive, that will make people think about the situation, and in my case, I want to be able to just perpetrate it. Perpetrate it, is that the right? Make it perpetual.
Yeah, perpetual.
Yes. So, I don't know.
That's great.
Does that answer your question?
No, it's a great answer. I think I really look forward to seeing, because one of the things I've noticed for myself as an artist, but I think I see it a lot in other artists, it's, as I was saying before to Carolyn, that it's been very interesting to me how much work that is in the Wyndham Art Prize this year is related to, you can see as a relationship to what's going on. But I'll also think that often with artists, the work that they make after the fact is the most interesting, because it's like that like you were saying, it goes in, and then you find yourself making things further down the track, and you go, that was about COVID-19. I didn't realise. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm really looking forward to seeing what emerges from your work in a year, maybe 2 years' time, as all of your experiences now start to come through in your work. So,
I'm looking forward to continue doing it. And thank you very much. I think you guys have really been a pillar for me as an artist. I really, I plan to continue just expanding on these experiences that I'm having in life, I'm not, this being part of this has really energized me.
That's great.
And I just wanted to mention something that being an artist this time, we're now doing a online exhibition, which, from a sculpture point of view, you feel, it's not going to be able to give that experience. But the benefits of this is that the exhibition is happening, and the message is going to be out there. And most importantly, that people, my family in Venezuela
exactly.
is going to be able to experience this.
People all over the world will be able to see this, which is the benefit in the long run of being able to build this virtual gallery that we've managed to do for this exhibition, that will hopefully be able to do this, in other formats and in other ways, and then, bring art from Venezuela to show in our little virtual gallery. Like, there's lots of different potentials that will come out of this, so I think that's really great. But I'm really thrilled that your family and your friends and your people in Venezuela will be able to see your work in the Wyndham Art Prize.
Oh, they're looking forward to it.
Really awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's been great having you talk about your work, and I really appreciate, you and the other two artists who came and spoke to us. I really appreciate, I'm an artist, I live in Wyndham, and I love having my fellow artists around in this community, and I think it's really great. So thank you from my heart and from the Wyndham Art Gallery to all of you from being artists in Wyndham. It's great.
Thank you very much.
I'm Carolyn Warren-Langford, and my work in the Wyndham Art Prize is called Everything is Fine. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay, well, Caroline, thanks so much for coming in and having a chat with us today about your work in the Wyndham Art Prize and your work in general as an artist. So You're a local visual artist. You do all sorts of amazing work. So
Thank you.
I love your work, and I've been following it for a long time. So would you like to just talk a little bit, first of all, about the work that you've submitted in the Wyndham Art Prize this year?
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity of being in the Wyndham Art Prize. I really like being involved with it and seeing everyone's work that comes out every year. My work is a sculpture called Everything is Fine, which is
perfect for now.
More pertinent now than what it was when I started creating it, I think. So she's it's that little voice in your head that tells you everything is fine, or maybe you're trying to convince yourself that everything is fine, or maybe it's everything's fine because you just don't care, you know, you've lost care, so you say, oh, everything's fine, I don't care anymore, you know. Or it could be everything's fine, and or when you say to someone, they ask you how you are, and you say, I'm fine, because...
Do they really want to know?
Do they really want to know exactly, or do you really want to tell them, you know? They're not gonna, you're not fine, but you don't tell them anyway, you know. So it's all of those things, and people can interpret it how they like.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a play on the word. Like, it doesn't really, I mean, it can mean lots of things, as you've just described, but it's also a bit of a play on that word, you know. Like at the moment, I think one of those statements, like everyone's saying everything's going to be all right, you know, and we're all in this together, and all of those cliches are being used an enormous amount now. If I hear anyone else say again, we're all in this together, I think I'll scream. Right?
Well, yeah.
But it's almost like that's what your work is. It's playing with that way of saying things that don't really have any meaning. Yeah. No, I mean they have a meaning, but they're not authentic.
They're not authentic. And I've also noticed that lately there's these really popular women's T-shirts that have that "It's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine" on them, and they're meant to be humorous, but are they really humorous?
And it also makes you, that whole thing, everything's fine, really makes you think, why do you need to say everything's fine? You know, like, you'd only say everything's fine if things weren't fine. Do you know what I mean? So it's sort of got that double meaning as well.
Yeah.
That's what I think of when I see those T-shirts. I go, why do you have to wear a T-shirt that says everything's fine?
Exactly.
Are you really not okay? You know?
And, you know, some people ask you everything's fine, and you say, yeah, I'm fine, everything's fine, but really you're not. But you're not going to tell them that, because you've just spent all morning pulling yourself together, putting on this facade that everything's fine. So you're not going to tell people that it's not fine, because you've just been trying to convince yourself all day that it is fine, you know.
So do you want to describe how that shows up in your work for you? Like, obviously it's different, everyone's going to have a different reading of it, but I think you know, the work itself is very powerful, and it's clearly not fine for that character. But I'm wondering
this is what's behind the facade that people put on, you know. My sculpture is what's behind that facade for me. The top figure, she's red, and she's she's unbalanced. She's got tiny feet. The curves of her body contrast with the spikes on her head and her face and things like that. And the bottom figure is washed out, drained. If you really look closely at the back of her skull, it's cracking under the pressure of the weight of the burden of having to say everything's fine all the time when it's not fine, you know. And the bottom one, shall I talk a bit about the process of making her? Or the colours?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so she's a made from earthenware paper clay, and she didn't get fired. I call her she, even though there's two parts. She didn't get fired for a long time, for years. So when you don't fire clay for a long time, sometimes what happens is the mineral salts and things leach out with the changing humidity in the atmosphere. And then when you fire it, those salts, because they're kind of gathered on the surface of the clay, become glazy. So if you look at the bottom of her, it's all this glazy, that some people might say is a blemish on their work, but I thank the kiln gods for that. You know,
Yeah, well, your work, it really does take advantage of those, you could call them happy accidents, but I think you've got quite masterful at creating those happy accidents.
They just seem to happen, you know. I feel like I don't really have control over what I make. I have a vision of what I might hear a song lyric or something and go, I know exactly what I'm going to make. And then as it gets made, sometimes it just doesn't want to be that. It wants to be something, it wants to be its own thing. So it's something that just gives birth to itself. And with the top figure, she just wanted to be red. She insisted on being red. I tried so many other colours and no, red. She wanted red. So she's red. And she's painted with acrylic paint. So I don't really like the look of conventional glaze on my sculptures. I like them to look more earthy and less manufactured kind of thing. So I'm really exploring with cold finishes at the moment. So cold finishes are acrylics or paint or wax or alcohol inks or, you know, lots of different things.
So it's more sculptural than ceramics. I think your work has gone, I've watched your work for a while and I think it's really gone further in that direction. It's much more sculptural than I wouldn't call you a ceramic artist necessarily, I'd call you a sculptor.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, because you do play with mediums that aren't really traditionally ceramic, even though that's the
even
sort
though
of
I'm
basis
using the clay,
of what you use,
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how you started out as an artist and where that's come from, where that sort of moved to being a sculptor rather than making pots or the other things you used to make, like how did you end up where you are is what I want to know.
Okay, so I've always drawn all my life. I've always drawn. I did art at high school, and then I dropped out of school and went on with life. Well, not dropped out of school, left school and went on with life. And then I decided to do a community clay course.
Oh, wow.
And I made a sculpture of two people on a motorbike. Had to be a seated figure that we had to make, so it was two people on a motorbike. That was my first sculpture. And then there was a glass course offered at the uni, which was just like a night course that I went to, where you learn how to do kiln cast glass. So I made my first kiln cast glass sculpture then. And you use clay to make the original, which then gets destroyed when you're making the mould and everything like that. So it gets destroyed. So I thought, I really love this and I want to learn more about it. So I went to Curtin University where they had the clay and glass courses there, and I signed up to do glass blowing and anything glass I signed up to do. 6 months into that course, they decided that the furnace was costing too much money, and so they closed all the glass down, and I switched over to clay.
Oh, right.
And then after a year of clay, I switched over to jewellery in the 3D department, so where I learnt soldering and casting metal and all of that. So what I've got out of all of that is I love to make sculptures, and I love to also make those sculptures and cast them. So I could cast them into metal or glass or just leave them as clay.
It's great because it's like you bring all of those different teachings and trainings and learnings into doing what you do now, which is sort of experimental. I think you really are great the way you just try things and you just see what happens. And I think that's a great thing to do as an artist. Yeah,
I love combining and things that I've learned from like life drawing and all different things like that. I still apply everything I've learned to my clay sculptures and my glass work. Yeah, so at the moment I'm making a series of masks, which are first off made out of clay, and I made the original out of clay, and then I made a mould of that, so I'm making repeats, but I'm altering the repeats. Then I'm going to make a mould from them and then make them into glass. So eventually they'll be glass.
Wow, so that's a really interesting, is that something you started before all this happened with the COVID-19, or is it?
I started it, I had the idea and everything, and didn't have time. So now this has happened.
Yeah.
I've had more time to just concentrate on that.
Wow, that's great. So it's really interesting. One of the things I've really noticed in this year's Wyndham Art Prize entrance is that so much of the work is relatable to what's happening right now. And
Isn't
it's
that
like,
strange?
It is. What it tells me is that when you put a context around something and you look through, or a lens, and you look through that lens, it's amazing how many things relate. You know, so there's actually someone who put a work in, Jane Bartier's got a work in there which is called Am I the Plague? I Am the Plague. You know, and it's like she did it a long time before this all happened. And your work, and there's lots of different people's work who inside of the, you know, I guess in the end it's to do with the fact that artists often tap into the human condition. And so when you tap into the human condition, you know, especially under a time like this, which is stressful and brings up all of the sort of issues that everybody has to deal with, and they deal with it commonly, that lens becomes really relevant in their work. So yeah, but I think it's going to be great to see what happens with your masks, because that'll have a whole other set of meanings now this has happened. It's really great.
I think so too, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been really great to talk
Thank
to you, and really look forward to seeing that work when it happens.
Thank you very much.
And congratulations on being in the Wyndham Art Prize.
Thank you.